All right. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to episode 6 of the Keep It Simple podcast. Tonight we're in for a treat. My very dear friend, good friend, Brandon Friebe is on, and Brandon lives up in Fayette, Missouri. He is a husband and a father. He is a son and a brother. He's an incredible friend. He's a pastor. And he and his family have launched a project and are working together. They call it Three Chord Crossing. And so the one kind of unifying piece through all that is the importance of authenticity in relationship and in community. And so we've been talking about this quite a while. And it's a real treat to have Brandon on. Brandon, welcome. And gosh, I don't know how long we've been talking about this, but it's been quite a while.
Yeah, man, we've been, you and I've been friends, really building our friendship for probably the last, I don't know, year or so. We've
Yeah,
known each other longer than that, and
yeah,
we have a like friend in Tim, and Tim introduced us and thought we would get along great, and I think he was right. And
yeah,
so, man, I've enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm just honored that you think I'm worthy of the Simplify project, man. It's cool. I'm excited to be here. So,
yeah. Tim. So a lot of you that listen and watch faithfully, you'll know Tim Rost. So Tim is who Brandon's talking about, and so for people back in Georgia, what Tim told me, like in the years leading up to us actually becoming friends, Tim kept saying, "I got to get you in touch with my friend Brandon. You guys will hit it off. He reminds me of like an adult Connor, like an older Connor." And so for you Georgia people, Tim was spot on. Those of you who know Connor and love Connor. Brandon is an older version of Connor. So we're talking about that quality, that type of person. So we'll dive right in, man. As a husband, as a father, talk about a little bit about the importance of authenticity. Maybe share some of your story coming along, times or places where maybe you didn't sense or experience authenticity and the effect that had on you. And then how that has translated into your approach as a husband, as a father, just with your family. Let's start there.
yeah, I mean, community's always been a big part of who my family's always been. I grew up in the church. My grandfather was one of my grandfathers was a pastor for 50 years, and so
Wow.
I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between
Yeah.
as to what happens if community is not done well. I've seen what happens and the blessings that are available to people when community is done well. And I'll just be honest, in my own life and my own struggles, I've experienced the consequences of being a part of healthy community, and the consequences of not being involved in community, whether that be something that happened to me or just my own stubbornness kind of stiff arming community. And
Yeah.
so I think it's been a common theme that's been kind of intertwined, woven into the fabric of my life, my family, my marriage, even the way that I parent. Community is a big deal, and I say it all the time. If God wanted us to be alone, He wouldn't have created anybody for us to hang out with.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. I mean, He created. He legitimately said it's not good for man to be alone, and so
Yeah.
if God's saying that, then I think we probably ought to listen. So. But it's been a big part of everything I've ever done. I mean, I was a basketball coach for a long time before I got into full time ministry. And then when I left that, and got into ministry, obviously, when you're talking about church life and discipleship and the effort to discipleship or to disciple people well, community, I believe is the main vehicle for
Mhm.
discipleship. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, community is important. And I mean, you mentioned three chord crossing. We're not even really sure what that is yet or what it's going to
Yeah.
turn into. We just know that God put it on our hearts. And so we're pursuing it and trusting that God's going to fill in the blanks as we go. But even with that, I mean, it's 100% driven behind creating authentic, genuine community where people who have like minds, whether it just be the agricultural community, the
Mhm.
outdoors community, the rural America community, whatever that would be able to find a safe place to feel like they belong to something.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talked about this kind of times and seasons in our lives where we isolate. You and I have talked. I mean, we meet for lunch. For those of you who are watching and listening, Brandon and I get together every other week for lunch, and so it's so life giving and encouraging to be able to build a relationship with a person that's in the same trenches and hardwired alike and have a lot of the same passions and but that and it's I see it in men. I don't know if you do or not, but I see it in men more than women. But I think now two parts. Number one, men the way that if left to our own vices, we will isolate. But then culturally, just America as a culture, the way that we have come to live in silos, which breaks down that authentic community. What has been your experience personally and dealing with people in this kind of tendency to isolate?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that happened. Everybody really wants to blame it on COVID, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, dude, this has been happening a long time before that. I think you're right. I think we see it more in men. I think it's kind of driven in two parts. Number one, those men that exist that really do feel their obligation and their calling, if you will, kind of how they're hardwired at the root of things to be the protector, to be the provider, to be the fixer. I think for whatever reason, whether it be society or the enemy or whatever, I think they've gotten to a place where a lot of men feel like failures if they can't figure out how to do things on their own without help. And
Yeah.
so men have really done their best to try to eliminate the need for other people, and I
Hmm.
think that's gone to an unhealthy level. And I think that it's also driven by pride to some extent. I think that I'll just be honest. I think in my own life, I've struggled with some of that, and like, man, if I can't fix myself, then nobody else can do it, or nobody else should have to do it, or
Hmm.
if I can't deal with my junk, why would anybody else want to? And so I think it just deals with a lot of a man's perspective about who he is, who he's been created to be. But my experience is this, and this has been my personal life too. A lot of times, what happens is it's just a lack of being willing to dig into it.
Hmm.
I equate it to kind of the cancer thing, right? So like if you get diagnosed with cancer, there's a treatment, but you can't do a treatment until you know what kind of cancer you're dealing with. Well, pride is a cancer in a lot of ways for men, and so what happens is they start living a life that reveals all of these symptoms of not belonging to something that's bigger than themselves, not belonging to a community, and they want to fix it, but they don't know what it is, and so they
Hmm.
don't know what the root of the problem is. And so I think that's one of the things that through my own struggles, I think I kind of came to that place where it's like, man, you got to do some work. Like you got to get your hands dirty and realize that first, you weren't designed to do this by yourself. So secondly, you got to figure out who are the people that love you enough to get dirty with you,
Hmm.
and to do the work and to roll up their sleeves and to deal with stuff that's not fun. Everybody wants to do the fun stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everybody wants to belong in relationships where they come out feeling like the hero, but you put a guy in a situation, especially men again, you put them in a situation where they got to admit that they're wrong or admit that something's broken inside of them, and they're like, man, I'll just rub some dirt on it and move on.
Hmm.
So I see that a lot. I mean, I see that a lot, and again, a lot of that is stuff that I walk through in my own walk, in my own journey.
Hmm.
But to experience the healing that comes from the other side of that, to know that when you find a group of people who are 100% willing to celebrate with you when you win, but are willing to fight battles with you when you're struggling.
Hmm.
Man, there's nothing like it. There's
Yeah.
nothing like it. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not. My dog is being annoying.
Yeah, we're dog friendly. We love dogs. But yeah, I mean that. So there's this thing that you touched on, this idea of weakness, and my background coming out of rodeo and dealing with stockmen and just kind of that agricultural background to a degree. I get all of that, and it is a hurdle. It can be a roadblock to think that vulnerability is weakness.
Yeah, yeah.
And I see it. I do see it more in guys, and it seems to me, just in my observation in a 20-year sample size, the older a man gets before he's exposed to that authenticity and community, the harder it is to take that step. So, like, you've done youth work longer than I did. I mean, you're still in those trenches. You've done it a lot longer than I did. So, we talk about like preteens and teenagers. If we begin to model and introduce this vulnerability and authenticity and trust. Trust is so big in the
Mm,
process. But if we
yeah.
begin to introduce that at a younger age, before culture and before the world grabs a hold to somebody, I don't know what your experience has been like, but then by the time a young person gets out of college, kind of the last couple of years of college, and then out of college and into the workforce or whatever they're up to next, it gets more and more difficult to break down those obstructions, and to get a person to step into that authenticity. Have you seen that? Has that kind of been true in your?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you've seen, I think even in the way that students, let's say young people, high schoolers all the way into college age people, the things that they deal with today, I cannot imagine
Me
being a
either.
teenager in today's world,
Me either. Me
Um,
either.
I used to be like, I don't want to get old, but you think about that and like, when I was a teenager, there was no social media.
Yeah.
There was dial-up internet, and so it was like, it was
Yeah.
like, dude, I didn't have the world at my fingertips. And I think that I'll just be honest, I'm not one of the. I mean, you know me, I'm not one of those guys that blames the devil for every little thing that goes wrong. I mean,
Sure.
we like to, make him the scapegoat for a lot of our dumb decisions sometimes, but I look at what teenagers have to deal with, and you look at what happens, right? And so immediately, students enter this world of comparative Christianity, comparative everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so what has happened is society has created this abstract of community, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the stuff. And they call it community, and it's not really community. It's just a place where kids go to realize they see the very best of what everybody wants to put on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they get off, they turn their phone off or their battery dies or whatever. And then they start looking at their life and they're like, well, my life's nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they start to put up these walls around them and prevent themselves from authentic community, which is
Mm-hmm.
what we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from a very young age, you look at that and you're like, yeah, the enemy's got that figured out, right? Like he's creating these fake versions of community for young people. And so they have nothing from the very beginning, potentially, unless the families and parents are intentional about, encouraging them to create that.
Mm-hmm.
They have nothing to lean on. And so then as the older that they get, what they've done is they've gone year after year after year after year, living under their own strength, living on their own power, living without the actual, true, genuine support and relationships with people. And so as people get older and older, and it looked different for older generations. You look at generations now. I think of my grandparents, who went through, Depression era, World War II era, I had that one, I had one grandfather that was a pastor that I've already mentioned. I had another one was a World War II veteran. I mean, there are things that he experienced that we just didn't talk about,
Hmm.
and it was that mindset of just go do your job, be who, take care of your business, and just don't let anybody else into it. And so I'm not just saying that today's young people have it worse than everybody else, but you're right. I think the older you get, you learn to adapt. You learn how to, natural selection in a
Hmm.
non-evolutionary term.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
learn you learn how to adapt, and you learn how to live life and survive and do things to try to protect you and your own. And and you lose. I mean, you can live that way. People have done it for years and generations, but you lose out on the blessings that God really created for a community to provide for you. And I really do believe community. Not to read too much into Scripture. I don't want to do that, but when we're called, when Christ says, hey, if you're tired, come to me, and I'll give you rest.
Yeah.
And then he goes on and he says, my burden's light. It doesn't mean that you're going to live a burden-free life. What it means is that if you're doing it the way that he asks you to do it, it's going to be easier to wear, right? It's going to be something that's fitted for you. And I think that's what community is. I think that when we try to live life without community, we're pulling on something that's not ours to pull.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but yeah, I
Hmm.
see that a lot. And even in students that, even when I first got into ministry, I've always been involved in ministry, even when I was coaching basketball back in the day. But players I used to have, or kids who used to be in our youth group, you see them now, as adults, and you see that still
Yeah,
the walls that they begin to build when they were kids, they're
yeah,
still living behind.
yeah.
So
And the flip side is true too, though, right? So you see kids that came through your program that engaged and allowed the Spirit of God through relationships to work in them. And you can, even from afar, you can keep up with them on the socials and you
yeah,
see kind of the tendencies in their lives and what their lives are producing. And so it's kind of at least in my experience, that's a double sided coin. You see the ones who were not willing to break out of their silos and who wanted to stay, guarded. And then you see the ones who were willing to take those steps and kind of, not saying that they're perfect, but certainly growing in relationship and growing in grace. One of the biggest struggles for me is when I'm interacting with like a 30 to 40-year-old guy, with either coming into the relationship trying to build the friendship with no background of authenticity. And so as you get to know a person, journey with a person, hunt with them, whatever you're doing, hey, how are you? I'm good. How are things? Fine. You know,
yeah,
how's work? Fine. How's family? Fine. Everything's fine.
yeah.
And because you live your own story. Well, everything very seldom is everything fine. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I've seen that for so long, and not to, I don't want to chase too many rabbits here, but like rule. That's why rule America. I feel like God has kind of put me smack dab in the place where I feel most comfortable. And
Hmm.
we were living in the Springfield, Missouri area, which is just blowing up. I mean, people are moving there like crazy. And I was on staff at a church. This was right after I got out of coaching, and we're on staff in what is kind of a suburban area. At the time was one of the fastest growing churches in the state of Missouri, just doing some incredible things. We go to this conference, right? This ministry conference, church leader conference in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We go to the conference, and the speaker, his name was Shannon Odell. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but
No.
he gets up and he starts preaching this message, and he's like, we spend bazillions of dollars and on people who go to the most remote places over on the other side of the planet, and, which is good. Like that's a great thing, but he's like, then we got people who are called to the most remote places in the United States, and we question their calling, and we question whether or
Ooh.
not we question whether or not it's really if they've really heard from God. And so, dude, he just starts reading my mail. my wife was at the conference with me, right? And so she grew up in Kansas City. And so she's, she didn't know what to do with me, little hick boy from, South Central Missouri, where there's more cows than people. And I mean, it was just crazy. And I remember after he got done preaching that message, and I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of my seat. And she looked at me and she just stood there and she's like, we're moving back to small town, aren't we? And I said, yeah, I think we are.
Wow.
And that was one of when we started pursuing that and beginning to try to figure out what that looked like for us. One of the first things that I thought about was if anybody is living, watching this, lives in a small town, they may experience the same thing, but people who live in flyover states, especially in agricultural communities, farming communities that are small, they're very proud in a good way. And what I mean by that is like they're proud of how hard they work, and they should be because they work their tails off. But with that sometimes comes a wall that you build up around yourself that creates this isolation thing. Like, we can do this on our own. We don't need your help. And I think that society's helped us get to that place. And that's one of the things that immediately when we moved back to Fayette, I remember we moved in August, and we were not even unpacked. We had no place to live. Like, we were living in my brother's house because we couldn't find anywhere to live. And instead of trying to figure out where we were going to live or unpacking boxes in some kind of rental property, 2 days after we moved here, we started trying to build relationships with people who we knew were in the community. I was hauling hay for a guy who's become a really good friend of mine, who ironically was a student when I used to teach here. This is my second stint in Fayette. And so the first time we came to Fayette, I was a teacher. He was a student here. And never in a million years would I have thought, man, we're going to be friends someday. We show up and we immediately just went to work. And 2 days after we moved here, man, we were in his hayfield throwing square bales.
Wow.
Not because I love hauling hay that much, but because that's what we came here to do, was to build relationships and establish community with individuals who, had like-minded interests and who were family guys. And we just wanted to live life with people, to know that they weren't alone. And so that was something that with my experience of growing up in a small town, I had witnessed that firsthand, and the importance of community and authentic relationships with individuals. You're never gonna be able to minister or to disciple a person, or really be a genuine friend that can win with a person, or celebrate with them when they win, or go through tough seasons with them, until you have relationship, rapport, credibility, until you can prove that you genuinely give a hoot about that person.
Yeah.
They got no time for you, nor should they, frankly. And so that's been really kind of at the heartbeat of ministry and going back to smaller communities. So
that mindset of people have to know that you care before they care what you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
They have
Absolutely.
to know that you care about them.
Yeah, you can tell them all day long, right? But I mean, if you're not living it out, dude, talk is cheap. I mean, the world in which we live today, that's all people do is run their mouth. And so until you can get to a place to where day in and day out and time after time, when opportunities present themselves, they didn't have to come beg you for help. They didn't have to come beg you to live life with them.
Right.
But what you've done is you have genuinely proven, hey, dude, I want to live life with you and your family. We want to we want to do this thing together with you, not because we want something out of it, but just because we genuinely love you and we want to see you succeed. So.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book the Speed of Trust? Like Stephen Covey or Stephen, it's a business book. But for me, when I read it, I was asked to read it. I was on staff at a church, and the lead pastor, who's a great friend of mine, who I love dearly, had our staff read it. And so how I'm hardwired. I'm processing it all from a relational side. But the gist of the book and what stuck with me is trust. The speed of trust is expedited, centered around two things: character and competency. And
Wow, yeah.
so in our relationships, kind of staying in this theme or thread of people have to know that you care before they care what you know. In character and competency, are you trustworthy? When you are with a person, whether that's a week, a month, or a year, and they do begin to confide in you, are you trustworthy? Are you a steel trap? Are you a person that's going to take whatever it is they have to share and just hold it?
Yeah.
And that character in that. And then the competency part is if they come in need or asking for help, to be able to be competent enough to meet their needs or try to come alongside. And if we're not in silos and we do have this web of authentic relationship, maybe just maybe you come to me about something and it's not in my wheelhouse. I have no experience. I don't know how to help you, but I know a guy.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and that guy has got a type of relationship like you and I have, and then you build this network of like-minded people who are all just trying to be authentic and transparent. And so I think the character piece and the competency, a lot of times in my relationships with other guys, the first thing that we have to get is the trust, that character. And then, just like my friend Gabe, who was on a couple episodes ago, he's got this saying, people aren't projects.
Mm,
And so when they finally do come to us, which is an act of trust, when they finally do come to us, for us as men, not to go into fix mode, but just to journey alongside people and prove ourselves competent. And one more thing, and then I'll be quiet and you can take off. But the other thing that I think keeps a lot of people, men and women alike, keeps them on the fence and unwilling to engage deeply is they don't think that they are competent enough. So, what if I build this relationship? What if there is a need? What if this person asks and I don't know the answer or I don't know how to go about helping them? Well, then I feel like an ignoramus.
mm.
So, out of all that, what stuck out? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, man, I'm right there with you. I think, personally, I try not to speak for a lot of other people, but I think for me personally, one of the biggest mistakes that I've made in my life are those moments when I try to be the fixer, right?
Oh yeah,
Like, or try to pretend like I know more about something than what I really know.
yeah.
Man,
Oh,
that's the quickest way. That's the quickest way to ruin a relationship, right there. Is just, dude, if you don't know something about something, then just say it, right? Because,
yeah.
but I love what you said, about the fact that if you're living in genuine community, what that should look like is, listen, I'm not asking you to fix the problem, but can you just go through this with me?
Mhm.
And I may not have the answers, or someone may not have the answers for me, but what happens is it's I'm reminded of that passage of scripture that we're given this illustration of the different parts of the body. The hand does this, the foot does that,
Mhm.
and they're designed for different purposes. And man, I think the design for that is 100% woven into a genuine, authentic community because, I mean, Ben, you got gifts and talents that I don't have. You got insight and you got friends that I don't have. But doing community and doing life with you, if something ever comes up, and knowing you the way that I do now, I know that you're not going to necessarily have all the answers. But what I do know is that you genuinely care about what
Mhm.
I'm going through. I know that you're going to pray with me about it, which means that if none of us have the answers, then now I got two people praying about it instead of one.
Amen. Yeah.
But there may be people in your life that have gone through this. That's what I love about what you're doing with this podcast. I mean, as I've watched these other guys and the gal that you had on last week,
Mhm.
as I hear their stories and man, they go through things that are specific in their things that I never had to go through.
Hmm.
And so, but I have had to go through things that they've never gone through,
That's
and
right.
so it's not a matter of whether who is more prepared or less prepared or more talented or less talented, but it
Hmm.
really is, I believe, woven into the design of community because we truly are, better together. That's the heart of three chord crossing. I mean, the verse that we use to back that up, it goes on and it says, dude, where two people would fail, maybe three would not fail.
Oh,
You're
wow.
stronger in numbers and the things that you face alone, it's very possible you're not going to get through it. But if you got two or three people that you really love and trust, it's not their job to fix it. It's just their job to stand there with you,
Hmm.
and so yeah, man, I think you hitting the nail on the head there, bro. I think that's the divine design, if you will,
Wow.
of what authentic and genuine community is supposed to look like.
Yeah, and so I had a professor one time. I don't remember much of any of the things the professors say, but I had a professor one time that said something to me that was simple and profound. And what he said is, we need to practice the ministry of presence.
Oh yeah.
He said, show up and shut up.
Yep.
That's what stuck with me is like, don't fix. You don't have to have answers. Literally, just practice showing up. Just show up.
That's it. Yep.
Show up in people's lives, listen, journey. If they ask a question, try to answer it. If you don't know the answer, the best thing you can say is, I don't know.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, that weaving together of people's stories, it's interesting with the simplified deal. We've kind of moved all over the map since 2018, over and over again, trying to be obedient, but really not super sure. And you and I have talked about this at some of our lunches and commiserated with your work at Three Chord Crossing and my work here. It's like God puts something on your heart, but you're not super concrete exactly what he's up to. And so
Right.
you work at it and you gain a little traction, but then it just kind of doesn't take. And so you think, well, maybe I missed that. Maybe I should just leave that alone. And as soon as we put it down, then the Lord brings it right back. You know, uh, to your point, I do think that the unpolished, unstructured, no agenda, just sitting down. I had a friend, a really close friend. He's going to be on in a couple weeks. He texted me the other day. He said, dude, I appreciate the podcast because at the end of each one, I felt like I've just sat and had a conversation with you for an hour or so,
Yeah,
and
man.
I miss you. Like I enjoy being with you, and this podcast is a way to feel that connection. And so I guess that might be what God's got going on here. But to encourage one another, somebody will hear parts and pieces of this and it'll speak in of your story and who you are and how you are, and that'll speak into maybe something that they've got going or some season that they're in, or so to encourage that, I believe is a gift. To attempt to model it from afar, is an interesting process.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah. You and I have talked a lot about that. The heart of three chord crossing was interesting. It literally came to me. I have these bouts. I don't know about you, but I have these bouts of, I don't know, holy insomnia, I guess I kind of call it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You lay in bed, you stare at the ceiling, you toss and turn. And what I've learned in my life is usually the Lord's trying to get my attention in those moments. And he brought that idea of three chord crossing to my brain in the middle of the night one night. I love hunting, I love fishing, I love being outdoors, but dude, the outdoor market for anything is so oversaturated. I'm like, that's the last thing I want to do
Yeah.
is to create something that's been recreated, 7.4 billion times in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But really at the heart of it, what began to resonate in my mind was like, man, just tell your story.
Amen, man.
The reality of the matter is that everybody has a story. Every story is different, but every story has lessons to be learned from it. Every story is going to find it's every story will fall on somebody's ears that can relate to it,
Hmm.
and that's really like, I mean, we're not selling anything. Like, we got no merch, we got no product right now. We don't even know what that looks like in the future. You can't even get online on our website right now and can't even order a bumper sticker. Like, there's none of that, but what it is it's a series of blogs and some video content that we've created and that we've committed to try to continue to make available to people that doesn't tell anybody else's story but our own,
Hmm.
and one of my favorite pieces that we've done in the last couple of years was a video that we called Golden Calves, that my brother Wes, he wrote and narrated the video that we put together, and it was just his own take on what it looked like to have his own version of golden calves in
Hmm.
his life, and the fact that golden calves looks different for each person, and encouraged the listener or the watcher, I guess, of the video to be able to evaluate their life and say, man, is there anything that's in your life that doesn't look like literally doesn't look like a calf,
Hmm.
but would be a golden calf, is something that gets in the way of your pursuit of the Lord. And that's really what we're doing, is just trying to tell our stories. It's therapeutic for us, to be honest. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
kind of, it's cheaper than going to therapy. It's and it's just one of those things that I can't tell you how many times, even in the last year and a half, somebody who I least expected would say, man, I saw your blog, and it's incredibly freeing to know that you're wrestling with that,
Wow.
because you'll find interwoven in there, like, there's no answers, like, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Like, we'll try to point people to the right direction, and we're super vulnerable about some of the things that we're walking through, and that's the encouraging part to a lot of people,
Hmm.
and so for now we have to be okay with that's what we know about it.
Hmm.
And again, like I said earlier, just trust that the Lord's going to fill in the blanks as we go, and he'll make it as big or as little as he wants to make it. But that's what I love about what you guys are doing with Simplify, man. It's the same thing. It's telling the stories of people. I've watched all the episodes so far, and what a blessing each one of those stories are, man. And they're so just radically different.
Hmm.
Each person is so incredibly different. But when I get done watching those things, man, it's like, dude, I feel like I just hung out and shared lunch with these guys, and they're just kind of
Amen.
telling me who they are, and I love it.
Yeah.
And that's what we hope. That's what we hope Three Chord Crossing can do too. Is just be a bridge to bring people to a deeper level of community with people. So.
Yeah. And Nat, you and I have talked about this. I've got this dream. I want to work towards building out a Simplify retreat,
Yeah,
and kind of just think kind of like your most epic youth retreat, but for adults.
yeah, yeah,
And but when we do that, like Lisa Retreat Center, couples or individuals can come in, and there'll be lodging and food and worship sessions and all the things. But then to have a session that's three chord crossing driven, or like my friend Jared Middleton, down in Dublin, Georgia, who's doing a 24/7 prayer movement. Have a session that's 24/7 prayer. Have a session that's, and bring in all of these people in person, just to hang out together and to do life
yeah,
together and to meet and integrate. And I think that when that comes to fruition, when that becomes a reality, that would be a beautiful snapshot of kingdom work, to have all of those people from all these different backgrounds and walks of life in a shared space. Kind of in one mindset, would be really, really cool. And so, in that, if you're listening to this or watching this, my hope is that one day you get to meet Brandon and Wes, and and interact with them to get to know more about their story. And Three Chord Crossings, what your website is, Three Chord Crossing.
Yeah, .com and
.com.
threecorecrossing.com. And it's you were talking about just kind of the ins and outs of whether or not you're going to pursue it or not. I owe a lot I owe a lot to my wife.
Yeah.
This year I told you this story. You know how it is to keep websites up and going, and it costs money, not exorbitant amounts of money. But dude, I got two teenagers. My son is 16, so my insurance automatically tripled. When he got his license, and so there's always things that demand your money, right?
Yeah.
And so it came up time for us to try to consider whether or not it was worth keeping our website up and going, and to pay for that. And we sit down, and my wife looked at me and she said, "Listen, if this is something the Lord has told you to do." She's like, I don't want you to have all the answers as to what you're supposed to be doing with it. Just do it. And so we kept it on, and so that was earlier, I guess, last month. And so we're committed to continue to try to figure it all out. And but you mentioned that it's kind of this weaving and this fluidity, if you will, of just trying to listen for the Lord. And yeah, man, those types of things, like you mentioned, the conference or the whatever you want to call it, the get
Yeah.
together, dude. I mean, that's community, right? It's getting
Yeah.
people of all shapes and sizes and backgrounds and all kinds of just talking shop. And the reality, the common denominator and all that is this, right? It's getting people together that understand that they're just broken people in need of a savior,
Hmm.
broken people in need of healing. And it may look different, but doing it together, man, there's so much power in that.
Hmm.
So
So making a shift, let's I don't want to let you go without spending some time. Let's talk about being a husband. Let's talk about
yeah,
being a father. The authenticity and transparency, not just in our marriage, but in our relationships with our children. You and I have talked about that a lot. Our well, your oldest and my youngest are very, very close to the same age, and so in that way, we're kind of in the same seasons of fatherhood. So let's just talk a little bit about. So often we think about authenticity in relationship, and we think about in friends and these social circles in church groups and that. But what about in the home? What about the importance of authenticity relationally in the home?
yeah. I mean, my wife and I just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary this past
Praise God.
July,
Yeah.
and our story is pretty. Well, I mean, it's incredible to me. I we got married, and our first year of marriage was awful. I mean, it was hard. I had no idea how to be a husband, and I had a temper, and I never laid hands on my wife. But man, I patched a lot of holes in drywall, and painted a lot of nicks that I put there because I threw my keys or whatever. I'm not proud of that. I'm ashamed of that. But it's and we lived in pretty close proximity to my parents at the time, and so anytime we would face a frustrating issue, I'd just run. I'd leave the house, and so that's how we found Fayette the first time. Was in our second year of marriage. There's some job things that happened, and budget cuts and whatnot. I made the decision to look for a new job, and God brought us to Fayette, Missouri in 2004. We didn't know anybody here. We had no friends. I didn't even know this place existed on a map,
Wow.
until I looked up the directions to come to the job interview here. And my wife and I both would tell you that this place saved our marriage. We had to
Wow.
learn how to live life together, how to be partners, and we had to invite God into that, and the healing work that He did when He moved us away from anyone and everyone who we'd ever known. And we're not talking like a plane ride away, but I mean, you can't just get in your car and drive 4 hours back to mom and dad when something goes wrong. And so,
Right.
here I was in my early 20s, and we moved to a weird place, and we had to learn how to do community, just the two of us. back in the early 2000s. And we had to realize that God's design for marriage is that we did it together rather than two individuals just trying to figure out how to make it work. And that's really the first time that I started to understand what God's design for relationships looks like. He just saved us. I mean, he orchestrated things. I look at it in hindsight and the things that we've walked through, and the community that was established because we made that move,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that we went through. I mean, I don't know how much of our story you want to know, but um, we had both. I had gone through some stuff as a kid physically that doctors had told me was going to make it pretty difficult for us to have kids. My wife was told as a teenager that she wasn't going to be able to have kids, and so that was something that was pretty important to us. So during that whole process, about 4 years into our marriage, things were much better. Our relationship was solid. We started to walk through the adoption process of adopting a child into our home. It was something that we both wanted to do, to be parents. And about 7 months into that process, um, I came home from basketball practice that day, and my wife, she throws this thing in my face, right? Little did I know until later that it was the pregnancy test that she had peed on to figure out whether or not she was pregnant. And so I'm looking at it trying to figure out what's going on. And it didn't dawn on me. It didn't register till later that she threw something that she had peed on in my face. But no, about 7 months into that whole process, we found out that we were pregnant with Caleb, and just the overwhelming emotional impact that had on us. Just it was almost. I'm not going to say that this was a "Thus saith the Lord" thing, but it was almost one of these things where it was like, listen, you've been obedient to figure out what it looks like to live life together. That you guys are, your partners in this, and it was almost like that God just kind of smiled on us and said, you know, this is what happens, and so now I'm going to trust you to be parents. And so, despite what doctors had told us, we had Caleb, and it was interesting. I don't know if you've ever done this, but um, I got a little greedy in my prayer life after we found out that she was pregnant. So now it wasn't just enough to have a child on the way. Like I was praying, God, give me a redheaded, blue-eyed boy who is going to be a great basketball player, because I was a basketball coach at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty funny. So my son was born. He had a red mohawk and he had bright blue eyes. And now his eyes are since changed, and he still has kind of reddish hair, and he's a good athlete. And
Yeah.
it's just funny how good God is. And then we had Kaylee about a year and a half later. She's 14
Hmm.
now, and but that's something that even now as parents, with teenagers, we purposefully and we're intentional with encouraging them to find genuine, authentic community.
Hmm.
And it's hard, as you can imagine. You've walked through it.
Hmm.
It's tough to find friends that you trust your kids with.
Oh yeah,
um,
gracious sakes, yes.
but um, but but our kids, have been so blessed with a great group of friends that they're not without drama. They don't, they have their flaws. They go through
Hmm.
their stuff, but they're starting to understand the importance of genuine, authentic community. And you and I talked, the other day, last time we had lunch. They're starting to understand what it feels like when you don't have that too. And
Hmm.
so that's a really long answer to your question. But even in my marriage, beginning in the early days, I began to understand what that looked like in the relationship of marriage, and then as parents, because we walked through that, I think we had a better understanding of what life looked like without it.
Hmm.
And so we've parented very intentionally with making our kids understand that at some point in time you're going to graduate and you're going to go on, and you're going to have to figure out how to do this thing called life on your own.
Hmm.
But remember that it wasn't designed for you to do it by yourself. they're off to a good start. Hopefully, we're not messing them up too bad along the way. So,
Yeah, and that so I'm fully convinced. I have this deep conviction that when honest open communication breaks down, authentic relationship breaks down. So
yeah,
as goes honest open communication, and whether it be in our marriages, whether it be in our relationships with our kids, the inability to stay at the table. Like
yeah,
when we get to this place where I don't know if we want to call it I don't know if we want to call it selfishness. I don't know if we even need to call it anything, but when we get to this place to where we just shut down or flee, fight or flight, depending on how you're hardwired, when honest, and I mean like truly honest, accurate representation of self, when honest, open communication breaks down, authenticity in relationship goes out the window.
yeah,
And I've seen it in our marriage. I've seen it in couples that we've journeyed with, been blessed enough to journey alongside, and that ability. But with our kids, that's where I'm getting at in this, is not just with our mates, our spouses, but with our kids. I know early on as a dad, I would blow hot over the strangest things.
yeah,
More times than not, had nothing to do with my kids. To be quite honest with you, if we're being transparent, usually when I blew hot, it was because what I thought others would perceive of me as a father through my children's behavior. So
come on, yeah,
it had nothing to do with my kids.
yeah,
It was all about me, and if my kids act this way or don't act that way or say this thing or don't say that thing, then others are not going to perceive that I'm a good dad or a right dad or whatever. And which all of that is just kind of work that we have to partner with the Spirit of God to work out in us. But in those instances, then to be able to go back to our kids and sit down and say, you know what, man, I got that wrong,
yeah,
and I own it. And I've seen parents double down. So I've seen parents come to this realization, like, I messed up. But instead of taking the humility route and going and sitting down in authenticity with their kids and saying, look, dude, I messed up. And that really had nothing to do with you. It was about me. And I'm sorry. And I'm asking you to forgive me. In,
yeah,
Instead of going that route, I've seen parents double down and been, and I've seen the harm that that causes in students within our ministry and just other folks I've dealt with. But you know, I'll never forget the look on Wick's face the first time I sat down with him and apologized and asked him to forgive me. His face was like, "What is happening right now?" You know what I
right,
mean?
yeah.
Like,
The
I don't
hammer is
remember.
about to drop. Yeah,
Yeah. He was. I don't know how old he was. He was what, 11 or 12 years old, maybe. Um, and I don't even remember the issue, of course. But just when I went to him and sat down, and I mean, it was hard. I'm dealing with a kid
yeah,
that I love more than anything, literally more than anything. And even that, I mean, my hands are shaking, fully invested, like all the emotions, the love is there, but it's still hard, right? To sit down and say, I got it wrong. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?
yeah. Yeah, I think, what you're speaking of, I think is just it's two things. Number one, it's recognizing that at some point in time we're gonna make mistakes,
Yeah.
and coming to this reality that perfection as a parent or as a spouse is a perceived fairy tale. Like,
Hmm.
it will never be a reality.
Yeah.
You're going to make mistakes. You're going daily, like probably multiple times a day.
Yeah.
And the quicker that the quicker that we can come to that realization, then is when God can do the work, right? That He steps in and begins to make us understand the intentionality that it takes to do it. Because a lot of times, what happens, at least my experience has been in my own life and with other people, that I've had the opportunity to do life with them, it's when everything is going right that they get complacent and they're not intentionally doing it, right?
Hmm.
They're not intentionally continuing to build relationships.
Yeah.
And so when you're not doing it because everything seems right with the world, that's when something sneaks in and all of a sudden just blows everything up.
Hmm.
And it's coming to the realization that you've got to do these things on purpose,
Hmm.
and you know, as a husband, as a wife, as a dad, as a mom, the thing that you're talking about is coming to grips with the fact that, okay, I realize that I need to do this. Like you had to apologize to Wick. I know, a great example that I can think of is my kids are polar opposites. Um, my son is stubborn and is tough as nails, and you've got to, growing up, I had to parent him in a way that got his attention, right?
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
I have my 14-year-old girl, and she is tender-hearted and soft-natured, and if I even looked at her with an ounce of anger in my stare, like she'd lose it. She'd
Hmm.
cry and she would just melt. And it was understanding the differences of the people that God had entrusted me with as my children,
Hmm.
and knowing that now I'm responsible for intentionally investing in their life, not just as their dad, but making them understand that relationships is designed, they're designed by God, and this is how you work and build on those. And so
Hmm.
I feel like the relationships that I have with my kids, they're not perfect. I make mistakes, but what I know is they probably know more about me
Hmm.
than most anybody else on this planet. They've walked with me through ministry, which, as you're fully aware, is I do not. People don't understand the toll that takes on kids.
Yeah.
They do not understand it, and
Yeah.
they deserve a medal or something, the equivalent of whatever that looks like for them, just for what that demands of them,
Yeah.
the unfair expectations that it places upon them. And
Come
so
on.
I owe it to them to be real and upfront and to let them into my life.
Yeah.
And so they know about the struggles that I've had. You and I talked about this, about 4.5, 5 years ago. I went through a real big battle with just mental health, and I initially tried to hide that from my kids,
Hmm.
but they're not stupid. Like they knew that something was wrong, and they knew that my behavior was being influenced by something that they knew was not them. And
Hmm.
the only way I knew how to parent through that was to let them into it. And so, there are still things that we protect our kids from, but we're open and vulnerable and honest with our kids.
Yeah.
And they help us make big decisions. Ultimately, the ultimate decision is always made by their parent, by me and their mom. But we always ask their opinion, and I think that models healthy relationships, healthy community. And
Hmm.
my prayer is that since we're parenting them in that way, that maybe that's how they'll live their life. They'll be willing to
Yeah.
let people in. They'll be willing to understand that, the intentionality that it takes to do it well. So
Hmm. What do you think about this idea? I've got another idea. We are products of our environments and our lived experiences, but I've got this idea that the closer a person is to you, the harder it is to constantly and consistently remain open and transparent and not so much in the immediate, so like in the context of being a father, with our spouses or with our children, not so much, but then once you get beyond that ring, beyond that ripple, so you get, I'm in this, and you are too, I think, I'm in this weird stage where my role with my parents have started to change.
yeah,
And all of my life, they've been the caregivers and I've been the child. And then we're in this strange season where that's starting to kind of reverse a little bit. Dealing with my siblings, who I love dearly. We have great relationships, but that would be maybe that next string. And then the closest friends that we have, the Tims and those people in our lives. The closer somebody is, the harder it is for me over an enduring, like the long run, to continuously again and again and again and again remain open and vulnerable, especially if there's been hurt.
Yeah.
But then these people on the periphery, a lot of times I find myself being giving them more of a benefit of the doubt, or being a little more open to some of those people on the periphery that I may never truly deeply engage with. Have you experienced any of that at all, or am I just a weirdo?
No, I don't think you're a weirdo at all. I think, again, I can't speak for everybody else, but
Sure.
my experience has been that if I'm in relationships with individuals, I catch myself just making assumptions that are unfair assumptions, based upon things that have happened historically over time. Maybe a situation came up and a friend or a family member responded in that, in this particular way. And so you just expect that to be the default mechanism every time something comes up. Um, but, I see that, and I used to get really offended. I used to feel like a failure in that. And, where you would somebody would get upset, or they would feel disappointed, or, maybe they feel betrayed, or maybe they feel like they don't matter to you. That's never the end goal, right? But what happens is that individual's so close to you, it's almost like we take the liberty of thinking, well, I can get away with more because that person's close to me now.
Yes, they're stuck. They're
And
stuck with me.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I know I'm guilty of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna make this decision that is gonna put this person second,
Mm.
because of the fact that I know that they can take it better, and it's not
Hmm.
going to ruin the relationship. What a faulty way of thinking.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Uh, but even as I'm sitting here saying that out loud, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, yep, I need to apologize to this person and call this person and apologize.
Yeah.
But I think that's, I mean, the great example would be a husband and a wife, right? I
Yeah.
mean, how many times do we take out our bad day on our spouse, and they're the least deserving, but they're the closest person to us, and so we just take it out on them because we know they're stuck with us.
Yeah. Or
But
not to interrupt your train of thought, but as a pastor, as people who are in the people business, I know that probably doesn't land great, but it's true. I mean, we don't deal with like goods and services; we deal with people. How
right,
many times do you get home at the end of the day and you are peopled out? You
for
you
sure,
have you have nothing left to give. And
yeah,
so it's not even making decisions that doesn't involve or consider another. It's just like you're done. Like you're done. You just sit and stare mindlessly at the television until it's an appropriate time to go to till like 9 o'clock. And
yeah,
if
yeah,
you can do that without saying a word, um, it should not be that way. It should not. And I'm not like, oh gosh, woe is me, we're pastors. But that's a very real experience.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. I always used to, uh, you know, in my wrestling with ministry and what God has called me to do over the course of my life, and still is to this day, I still wonder. I have those moments where I'm like, I am arguably one of the biggest introverts I know. Like,
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I'm,
same.
I don't really like going on vacation, not because I don't like going places, but because I know there are going to be people there, and
Same.
and so, which goes against the grain of what we're supposed to be about, about
Yeah,
being pastors. And I mean, I love our church. I
yeah,
love our people.
yeah.
But you know, there's an old saying that says you can't continue to pour out from an empty bucket.
Hmm.
And there's just moments where your bucket's empty,
Hmm.
and I went through a season with that early on, before my kids got into high school. They're both in high school now, but when they were younger, I went through a season where I gave everything I had to everybody that was in my life, and my family, my kids especially, got my leftovers.
Mm-hmm.
And God really worked me over on that. And 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 so now I am unapologetically. I mean, I believe that my primary ministry before I step out of my door on a daily basis is my family.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't minister to my family, then I'm likely not going to be real effective to minister to anybody else. And so, it's like what you're talking about. That started with them feeling like I was a disappointment to them because they were getting my leftovers.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else was getting my best effort, and there was nothing left to give them. And so that's really what started that shift in me to deal with some of that. It's a greater level of awareness, a greater level of intentionality to give them the best version, the best portion of what I have to give,
Mm.
and then give out of the abundance of what God gives to me as a pastor. And
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like ever since I made that little shift in the way that I approach that as a dad and as a husband, I feel like it's not just benefited our family, but I feel like it's made me a more effective pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when people see that my family matters to me, it helps them understand, man, that this guy isn't just all talk. He's not fluff. He's the same dude at home that we see at church on Sunday. And I mean, I think that goes a long way with people.
Which is authenticity. I mean, it goes back to
Yeah.
that authenticity. And I don't think it's unique to pastors. I think that it's anybody that's in the people business. So, like
Mm,
salesmen, folks that are making sales calls and are with people. I mean, there are many, many professions where people are in the people business.
yeah.
Um,
My
and
wife's an
when you get,
educator. My wife's a teacher, and it's certainly the same way there.
yeah.
There's days that she comes home from school. She's passionate about her students. She's incredible at what she does. And there are just some days when she comes home and you look at her and she doesn't have to say anything. Like, it's like, don't talk to me, don't touch me, just leave me alone. Like, we'll try again tomorrow. And
Uh,
that's just part of it. It's just part of it. But
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I like to say is I have met my people quota and I have met my
yeah,
word quota. Like I've
yeah.
got nothing left. And I love that I knew that we would be deep, long friends. So that I say that I'm a high functioning introvert.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
get it done. I can get it done, but it doesn't mean I crave it, and that
Yep, yep.
which in my experience oftentimes make for some of the most um, fruitful servants because they don't necessarily seek all of the other stuff. It's like, I tell people all the time, and you will get a kick out of this, and inevitably there'll be some people, young adults, who will listen to this that I've told this. But when anybody comes to me and they're like, "Hey, I think I'm being called to ministry," the thing that I tell them right from the jump is, if you can go do anything else with your life and have peace in your heart, go do that.
My grandpa told me the exact same thing. So my grandfather that was a
Oh
pastor
wow,
for 50 years. So this is the same
yeah.
grandfather that pastored in churches for 50 years. And I remember having conversations with him about wrestling, leaving coaching and teaching and stepping into ministry. And I remember I had 100 expectations as to what he would tell me. But I will never forget the first thing out of his mouth was, Brandon, if you can do anything else and be happy, go do it. If you can do
Yeah,
anything else and feel like you are fulfilling the call that God's put on your life, then go do it. Because he's like,
yeah,
ministry will chew you up and it will spit you out. And and don't get me wrong, it is incredibly rewarding, but he was not wrong. he was not wrong. And it has very little. It is universal. It is not just the churches that we're at. Like, I love my church.
Me too.
They're an incredible group of people to live life with. But I've not
Hmm.
always been at this church, right? I've been in ministry for a long time, and it usually has very little to do with the church, and it has a whole lot to do with the people that cross your path. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting that you heard that, because you're talking about a guy who was in vocational ministry for half a century, and those were the first words that he told me.
Yeah, I'd never heard it. It just fell out of my mouth one day. I had a teenager come and like, "Hey, I think I'm being called to ministry," and I'm like, if you can do if
Right.
you can do anything else and be at peace, you probably better go do that. And if you go try other things and there is still that restlessness, that kind of wooing, that drawing and calling, which I love. One day we were eating lunch and you looked at me and you said, "What exactly is a calling? What is that?" We
Mm,
talk about being called like that. I can't tell you how much I've smoked that over,
yeah.
driving to and from appointments and kind of processing that.
Yeah.
That was good, but yeah, that I think that given our family our leftovers, and it doesn't matter what you do for a living. It doesn't matter what our professions are as busy, active men and women, moms and dads, husbands and wives. I love what you said that your first ministry, which is simply to serve, right? So minister literally
Yeah.
means servant. Ministry means to serve. And so the first priority of service is to our families. I wish that our culture could get back to that.
100%. Yeah. I feel like that's an area of our society that we've begun to understand the value of family, because we're beginning to see the consequences of what happens when you don't make them a priority and they're not done correctly. And I mean, shoot, we could sit here and we could spout statistics all day long about what
Yeah.
happens when a kid doesn't have a dad at home, or what divorces do to kids. And hear me, there's a lot of great kids and there's
Yeah.
a lot of awesome people that come from those types of situations. And so I'm not at all saying that I think you know what I mean. Like, I'm not trying to make anybody
I
feel
do.
bad if they've been through those situations, but what I
Yeah.
do believe that we see is we're seeing what happens when families aren't important, and there's a reason why the enemy attacks the family. There's a reason why the devil does his best to end marriages, to create conflict in homes. Because if he can do that, if he can create unrest, and if he can create dissension and conflict and tension in that environment, man, how much easier is it for him to do that amongst strangers, amongst people that live
Hmm.
life and work at your workplace? And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think the breakdown of the family is a much bigger problem than what we've made it out to be, I believe. And um, yeah, I mean, that me and my wife, we just made the decision, like, that's not going to happen here. Just not going to happen. And we pray into that every day, pray into it every day. So
And I believe the pendulum is starting to swing back. I mean, do
agreed.
you think that? Yeah, yeah, I believe so too. I believe the pendulum is finally. I think it has apexed and it's starting to swing back. And in that, I pray actually consistently. How many times has one of your students been the spiritual leader of their homes?
Oh yeah, I mean, we have that right now. I mean, we have individuals. We talked about this not too long ago. Our church purchased a building that's on that neighbored our church building, and so we purchased it. We overhauled it, gutted it, redid it, turned it into a youth building. And I remember praying specifically with our church leadership, as we were going through that process, like, I prayed specifically that God would send us students who were from broken homes, whose parents were lost, where church was not a priority. Like, send us those kids. Like, those are the kids that we want. Because I firmly believe, and Steph and I have seen this throughout the years in ministry where we've had our hands in student ministry. If a student starts to come into church and has a revolutionary experience, life changing relationship with Jesus Christ, they come to know the Lord. They begin to live their life, for the Lord. I'm a firm believer that if you've truly encountered Christ, you can't help but change, right? You can't help but be different.
Right.
And so if we can get a hold of students who genuinely encounter the Lord, who develop and pursue and chase after the Lord with their whole heart, that they can win their parents. And what that usually looks like is their parents are like, what is happening to my child? Why does, out of all the places that my kid could go, why are they wanting to go to church? Like, what's happening out there? And then what happens is you see church becomes important to those students, and then their parents start slowly coming to church. And it's not dirty pool, right? It's not like you're trying to manipulate students. But what happens is that students fall in love with Jesus. They go home and they're preaching that with the way that they live their life. They talk different, they act different, they do different things. And so then their parents, out of sometimes just simply curiosity, find themselves sitting in the back row of your church thinking, what is this all about? And then the next thing you know, it may take years to happen. But you start seeing parents come to know Christ because their student began to be the spiritual leader of their home. And they weren't going home and preaching 3-point messages at the dinner table. That's not the way they did it. They just started living life different. And man, some of the greatest stories and memories that I have in ministry over the years have come in situations like that, where entire households were changed for Christ. And it all started with the kid who just came to church one Wednesday night and started making different decisions, So
Wow. Wow. And praise God that that's happening. In all the years that I did student ministry, maybe on one hand, I can think of whole homes that were saved. Um, that statistic, and I'm not going to share the numbers because I'd be making it up and it'd be incorrect, but it's a single digit percentage when the teenager is a spiritual head. It's a low double digit percentage when the mother is the spiritual leader, and then it's a high double digit percentage when it's the father. And going back to the authenticity and humility as parents, I think that the parents who are in tune enough to see the changes in their kids are the ones that get curious and then begin to ask questions and then eventually come full circle. But I journeyed with countless teenagers who got so beat up and dejected because they could not get through to their parents.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they ever gave up. Some of them, I would bet, are still trying. And it just, I think in that mindset that the pendulum is starting to swing, my expectation is that we would see an uptick in entire families who are worshiping together. Like in the context of our local church, there is so much to praise God for, right? Whatever metrics people want to put to I hesitate to even say success, but whatever metrics.
Yeah.
The one thing that excites me, that gets me fired up, are whole families worshiping together.
Yeah.
And that's part of that pendulum swinging back, I believe. I think that's part of a big piece of this authenticity and transparency and vulnerability. And I think it does start in our one-on-one relationships with our friends as men. I think it does start in one-on-one relationships that our wives have with each other, just the community aspect in each of those relationships. I'm about to get excited. In all of those ways, you know what I'm saying? No,
Yeah.
that's the thing that brings me alive, and a gigantic piece of this Simplify work is the authenticity, it is the transparency, it is the community, but it's encouraging the parts and the whole of faith and family and friends and community and this kind of cog to move us culturally back into the original design.
Yeah, I love everything that you just said there, and that's why I'm so passionate specifically for fathers in our community. That's why it's so important to me to have friendships and relationships with people who are living in similar seasons of life, because I'm so passionate about the dad who's willing to take the bull by the horns and understand, like, I have to be the spiritual leader of my home. And so many fathers who maybe have always been in church and have the best of intentions. There's a difference between being a father who is a believer, who loves the Lord, and you can do all of those things and still not be the spiritual leader of your home.
Wow.
You can be saved by grace through faith and still not be the spiritual leader of your home. And I think that that's why community is so important, especially amongst men who are fathers and husbands, because it's imperative that we understand the difference. Because here's a statistic that I will give, because I know this and I use this often. 75% of people they who do not know Christ by the age of 17, if they have not become a believer by the age of 17, 75+% of those individuals never will.
Wow.
And so when you take that statistic and you realize what's at stake, when statistically speaking, now obviously God can do whatever he wants to do, and there are obviously individuals who will not become a statistic. But when you look at that and you realize how important it is that a child be raised in the way of the word and understand what it means to be a follower of Christ, which in turn points them into the right direction of everything else that we've talked about, right? Community, all of those things. That has to be done, statistically speaking, by the time they're 17 years, by the time they leave the house. And if a father, and I'm just going to be bold. If a father doesn't do that, I truly believe that God has equipped fathers to do that. And if a father doesn't do that, and I get it, there are situations where there's not a father in the picture, and there are strong females who have picked up the mantle and have done that well over the years. But I think that relationships between men are important because it should spur us on to do that role well. And it should encourage us to do it well. And it should give us individuals in our life that help us accomplish that task where we feel like we're not doing it by ourselves. You know? And I, like you, I'm getting all fired up and chasing rabbits and all that kind of stuff. But man,
It's hard
that's the
not to,
heartbeat.
though.
Yeah, that's the heartbeat of community for me, is because I know what it feels like to be a man who feels like a failure. But when you have people in your life who are willing to come alongside of you and who love you enough to even say the hard things like, dude, quit throwing yourself a pity party, dust yourself off and get back in the game. Like, do it. And that doesn't happen unless you have authentic community. And
Yeah.
But yeah, seeing that family dynamic, seeing whole families come to know Christ, there's nothing better. I mean, in ministry,
Yeah.
that's what gives you the fuel to keep going, right? And so, yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Cool. All right, we could go for days. We're an hour and 20 minutes in, so I know you all have supper. We have supper, but so every episode except Gabe's, because I forgot. I'm going to make it up to Gabe at some point. We'll have him back on later, and I may ask him twice. But so I try to end every episode with this question. How do you keep things simple? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think the simplest thing that I do is I just simply try to keep the main thing the main thing. I think that that's probably sounds a little cliche, but in our life, we have something that is pretty important to our family. Before we get ourselves involved in something or before we do something, we do the hard work of examining, hey, how is this going to impact our family? And does it have eternal worth? Is there something that happens inside of it that gives us opportunity to do the important work of the kingdom? But we've talked about it a little bit already today. We don't do anything that just blatantly puts our family at risk when it comes to um, the dynamic of who we are, what we believe, and why we believe it. And so we just try to do our best to keep the main thing the main thing. And sometimes that means you say some hard no's. Sometimes that means you make some people mad when you say no. But when you work hard to keep things simple by just measuring it by that standard of, man, is this something that God would have us do? It's funny how many things you save yourself from, and
Yeah.
and a lot of people are going to potentially look at watch this, and they're going to be like, wait, the freebies do anything besides simple? Because, dude, we run hard. We got so many things
Yeah.
going on, and but I can't imagine how even more chaotic our life would be if we didn't run it through that filter first. So
Awesome, man. I was just telling Charity the other day, no is a complete sentence. You can put a period. No period is a full
yeah,
sentence.
yeah, I'm still learning how to use that one, but
Me too,
yeah,
brother.
it's a pretty important one.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well, Brandon, thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for pouring into me, holding my feet to the fire. You are one of only two pastoral friends,
Mm.
genuine friends that I have here in Missouri, and you are community to me, man. And so I am thankful for you. I'm thankful for your family, and thank you for coming on. Thank you for the visit and for being vulnerable and open and authentic.
Yeah, man, you're a blessing to me too. I'm thankful God's put you in my life. It's for just a season like this. It was just for a time like this that I think that our paths crossed, and I'm looking forward to seeing how God uses us moving forward. And I'm grateful. I love you, and looking forward to our families getting to know each other a little bit better. And ready to go kill
Yeah.
some ducks later on this year, man. So
That's exactly right. We're going to hold Tim to it this year.
that's right.
All
That's
right,
right.
brother. I'll talk to you soon. I love you too.